So the first questions are just basic, are just how you got started
Yeah.
into the business.
Yeah, sure. So I actually adopted my first dog back in 2018, and I was a first-time dog parent.
Okay.
And so I think that when we adopted her, she's a boxer called Luchi. So when we adopted her, I think we pretty much went down a very conventional path. You know, what was common advice, what was conventional advice in terms of how to keep dogs. It was very much rooted in, you are the owner and the dog is to submit to you kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And so I think we pretty much had a little bit of that influence, but I think along the way, I think she taught me a lot. And she struggled with a few health conditions that um, just your regular pet food weren't addressing. She was sort of refusing that food. It wasn't working out for her at all. And so I said, I'm just going to start cooking for her at home and see where that goes. And I'm going to do home cooked food and see what happens with that. And I think once I started doing that, I saw a lot of shifts in her health. I saw a lot of shifts in, her temperament, her mood. I learned more about what home cooked diets for her could look like, what was the right way to sort of approach it with balance and making sure that I was, meeting all of the requirements of the diet for her. And that seemed to work really well with her. So I think that I got really inspired by that experience with her. And that's when I decided to sort of, study a little bit more about dog nutrition. And so I did that for about a year, and after that I started working with pet parents, with dog parents like myself, sort of helping them figure out the nutrition piece for their dogs. And then I think about 2 years later in 2020 we adopted a second dog called Mutton. And Mutton was very different from Luchi in the sense that she'd obviously been through an incredible amount of trauma and an incredible amount of, I think, neglectful history. And so she came in with a lot of baggage, and she came in with a lot of problem behaviors
Yeah.
that I didn't feel equipped to support her on. And she was a pit bull type dog, and so again, a lot of the training that was available around that time was very focused on aversive, on coercive methods, on reining the dog in, controlling the dog. They were very, very breed biased techniques, which didn't resonate with me at all, because I wanted something that was much kinder, was much more anchored in empathy and an understanding of what my dog was struggling with per
What?
se.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I decided to sort of sign up for a course. And so I signed up with a school in India called Bhak's Education, which is run by the amazing Sindoor Pangal. And so I did the the foundation course, which just absolutely blew my mind. It was very much focused on understanding your dog's needs, on communicating with them, learning how to communicate with them, learning how to read the dog. And so a lot of this stuff that was really helping me build my relationship with my dogs essentially. And then once I started putting some of those things into practice, like I saw results, I saw shifts. I was able to sort of address some of the root causes of the behaviors that I was seeing. I was feeling much more closer, much more connected to her. And then I think that inspired me to sort of just explore the whole behavior side for dogs. And
Yeah.
so after the foundation course, I did the advanced diploma with Bhaks as well, which is, a close to 3 year program. Um, and yeah, and then basically I just decided that, my dogs have taught me so much. And they've been such amazing teachers and mentors in the process that I have to share what I am learning from
From them.
them and with them, with other dog parents, like myself, who are in that journey where they're not able to figure it out. And so
Yeah.
today I run Luchi and Mutton's dog behavior nutrition. They're obviously named after my two dogs, and I do essentially one-on-one consultations with dog parents on both nutrition as well as behavior.
And
Yeah.
when you started, how did you got your first client? Like, doing through Instagram or
Wow.
online?
I don't even remember. But
Okay.
I think that I think it honestly, I think it started with I think just letting like family and friends know that, hey,
Mm,
I'm doing this. Are you open to, looking at a way for me to sort of improve your dog's diet? And can we try a few things? Can you make sure you're giving me feedback so that I know what's working, what's not working for your dog? And I think that's pretty much how I did it.
yeah.
What was also helpful is that for the first year of me practicing, I actually did consultations for free, right? So I didn't charge for them at all. And I think that I was very much anchored in the fact that I want to do this out of passion, but I also want you to give me feedback on what's working and what's not working for your dog. And so I think that really helped build a lot of confidence. That also helped build a lot of word of mouth
Yeah.
for me. And so I think that was the journey in the beginning. Yeah.
And when do you started like charging for people, like charging for your services?
Yeah, so I think with the nutrition piece, because I was simultaneously studying dog behavior.
Yeah.
Uh, so with the nutrition piece, I think after the first year, I started charging a nominal amount because I felt a little bit more confident. I felt like I was gaining a little bit more knowledge, and so it was definitely lower than what my contemporaries were charging. But I think it was after the first year that I started charging. And then once I was practicing as a nutrition consultant for about 3 years, I think that's when I started doing behavior consultations.
Okay.
But with behavior consultations, I mean, I started charging from day one. I didn't go down that path, but yeah, that was the beginning. Yeah.
And I have a question. Like, the last person that I interviewed,
Hmm.
she was talking about people doing a course for 3 months and
Yeah.
then they consider themselves a
Yeah.
nutritionist.
Yeah.
And w why do you think I believe it depends on the person.
Yeah.
Obviously, some people take it more serious than other.
Yeah.
But why do you think people should trust you? Like, why would you say that it's not the same with everyone? It depends from people to from person to person.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's something that I struggle with as well, right? Because again, I see so many people who can do a nutrition course online very quickly, very easily, and then, become essentially nutritionists, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think, like, if I were to be honest, and again, this is something that I say to anybody who will ask me about wanting to do a nutrition course, um, I'll tell them that essentially the course only teaches you so much, right? What you actually learn is once you start working with dogs and how you're able to put things together for that dog, right?
Mm,
So the course gives you like a really helpful but a really tiny starting point.
yeah.
But everything that you do after that comes from your own independent learning, comes from your own independent experience, comes from your own ability to critically think, to reflect, to see if this making sense, not making sense. You can't do this work by just riding on a course. Like, that's never going to cut it for you. And so, for example, even in my experience, like, I have a very, very holistic approach to just canine well being. And so, wherever I see that a dog is struggling with a health condition, or wherever I see that a dog is struggling with their diet, for me, it's not just about the food, but it is about what is going on in this dog's environment and in their day to day life, that could be causing an impact on how they are engaging with their food, right? Because it is all interrelated. It is the same way that it's connected for us. And so I think that holistic approach is really helpful. That holistic approach lends itself to a lot of credibility. And I am able to speak to that because, it helps that I've also studied dog behavior, right? So I understand that aspect of their lives as well. And I am able to sort of offer a more holistic assessment. So what I will never say to clients is, oh my God, if you fix your dog's diet, like everything is going to turn into magic, right?
Okay.
I don't believe that the diet can be a magic bullet. I think just like for human beings, where diet is one of the pillars of well-being, it's the same with dogs, right? I can give you the best diet in the whole world, but if your dog is continually exposed to stressful situations, if your dog is unable to cope with stressful situations, if your dog has undiagnosed medical conditions, the diet is not going to help your dog, right?
Mm,
If you're something as simple as if your dog is not sleeping how much they need to sleep, the diet is not going to help your dog,
I
right?
see.
So it has to come together really well, and I think that's the conversation, that's the narrative that I essentially hold for all my clients, which I think makes sense for them eventually.
Yeah, it does make sense. Like you're saying that if a dog is sick before they even see you, you're like you have to take him to the vet or something.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. And when you're working with a dog about nutrition, what is the first thing that you're looking for? And what I mean by that is, let's say he's a puppy. What are you looking into a puppy?
Yeah, yeah. So I think some of the, so there are obviously guiding principles, right? Some of them are like really basic. We're looking for, basic weight. We're looking for just activity levels. We're looking for any history of, medical care that might have been needed. Because again, depending on where the puppies come from, not, for example, here in India, again, we do have a lot of illegal breeding, right? So
Yeah,
puppies can be, can come from an illegal breeder as well. There could be a history of, disease there as well. So I think a couple of those things as well. And so when I start the consultation, it is on very generic principles, unless I get very detailed information from the dog parent as well. But once the dog parent starts executing the diet, then it is a two-way conversation. Then it is a constant back and forth to say, okay, what are you seeing different in your puppy, right? Are you able to see something as simple as, are you able to see that he's more excited, they're more excited about food time, right? Are you able to see better quality of poop? Are you able to see better quality of skin and coat? Are you able to see that your dog is being able to settle faster or rest better? So we start looking at those parameters of well-being together.
yeah,
And then I work pretty much ongoing with pet parents as well, as much as they're open to sort of giving me information about, what about the diet is working and not working, right? And so, in for example, with puppies, you have to be very mindful of the fact that they have multiple developmental phases. As they keep growing, they do need a larger quantity of food, right? And they need a more balanced quantity of food. And so, but again, for individual puppies, that could look very, very different. And so I think it is this balance of what feels generic and what is general for all dogs, what is true for all dogs, but also what is individualized to the dog that I'm working with. Yeah.
I see. I see. Makes sense. And now another question. You probably have seen the trends of the raw diet, of
Yeah.
whole foods diet. What do you think about the raw diet?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think that, and I mean, I'll share a very Indian perspective, right? Because again, I think that the whole narrative on dog nutrition, on what is right for dogs, uh, has a very Western influence to it, right?
Okay.
I think the narrative does not have space, or has not created enough space to really explore what, let's say, Asian cultures, what do they practice in terms of food, right? Or what do African cultures practice in terms of feeding their dogs? What do Middle Eastern cultures follow in terms of feeding their dogs? Because remember, food is also a cultural symbol, right?
Okay.
And so, food is inspired by where you are at. And so I think while I'm not opposed at all to the idea of raw diets, I think they could 100% work for dogs. Once in a while, my dogs eat raw food as well. I think it comes down to saying, what is it that your dog prefers, enjoys, and what is it that works for your dog? Because what works for your dog will not work for my dog necessarily, right? And so your dog could enjoy raw food, could enjoy a raw diet, but my dog might prefer a slightly cooked diet, right?
Yeah.
And how do we make room for those preferences, those individual preferences, instead of us always being the ones to say this is what the dog should eat. How can we just create room for saying, but what does the dog want to eat? And can we just balance that a little bit together? Yeah,
Yeah, I do think people always sway to the narrative of what's going on, and
yeah,
it does make sense that people agree with a diet that they come from wolves, so they should be eating raw food. It does make sense. But again, that last person I interviewed, she mentioned that if a dog is eating a lot of raw meat, that's
yeah,
like that can be an hazard because they can transmit the diseases like salmonella, and
yeah,
that's that thing that people never keep in mind.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like it's it's
Yeah,
it's it,
I think when we think about raw food, I think there are a lot of different things to think about, right? Like handling the source, the quality of the raw meat is a big one.
yeah,
I think with, light cooking, at least you run there is a positive of sort of killing the pathogens because of the heat a little bit. But again, I think with, just how you freeze, how you defrost, like there is a lot of different things to think about.
going on, yeah,
Although, again, I think that there is enough research to actually bust that myth that dogs can spread salmonella. In fact, it's shown that they don't necessarily have that response. But I think there are a ton of other things for consideration, right?
yeah,
I think what's also important to remember is that, raw diet may or may not be accessible to everybody,
to
right?
everybody, yeah,
Both in terms of an economic perspective, but also in terms of just individual preference. So maybe I am not comfortable handling raw meat, right?
yeah.
But that does not make me a bad pet parent. That does
Of
not
course
make
not,
me a
yeah,
less of a dog parent, right? So I think those choices also come down to a lot of individual human preferences, like what the dog parent feels about. And again, I don't think that there is one perfect diet for one dog, right? It's like saying there is one perfect diet for every human being on this planet, and that's
yeah,
just not true. So I think it is a little bit about personalizing it, individualizing it to the dog's context, and seeing what works for the dog ultimately.
yeah. I agree with that. And also, what do you think? Do you think dogs are omnivores or carnivores?
So, I have a little bit of a controversial opinion on this.
Okay,
And again, it's only because um, I come from a country where I see a lot of free living dogs, right?
okay,
And so that also influences the way that I see the evolution of dogs, right?
okay,
And do dogs have a preference for meat? 100%. They do have a
yeah,
preference for meat. Can they survive without meat? They possibly also can. And that's the
okay,
truth, right? And again, I see the population of free living dogs in this country. They scavenge. They mostly, scavenge from garbage bins and and dustbins, etc. Garbage dumps. And then, of course, we have amazing people across the country who sort of very actively cook home cooked
yeah,
food for their dogs and feed them. But not all of them can afford to feed meat, right? A lot of the food that they actually get is vegetarian, right? Or is a mix of vegetarian food with, for
with
example, kibble, right?
okay,
Or processed food. And so I do see populations of free living dogs survive for years
without
at a
meat.
stretch, right? Um, so I do. So I think that they have adapted. They continue to adapt, and dogs are incredibly adaptable creatures. We've seen
Yeah,
that from generations and generations. And so to me, it's not the fight is not so much about categorizing them as a carnivore or an omnivore, right? I think the conversation really is about, can they benefit with balance? And
I
100%
see.
they can benefit with the balance. Again, too much of meat or too much of protein can also cause issues. For
Yeah.
example, right? They can be extremely strenuous and stressful on your kidneys to process all of that waste and to excrete all of that out.
Yeah, actually, there was this poodle, this mini poodle that I used to train,
Right.
and her diet was like a lot on, it was kibble,
Yeah.
but it was chicken-based kibble,
Yeah.
and they were feeding her a lot of this kibble,
Yeah.
and apparently it was too much protein for her to process, and she
Yeah.
was like her energy was down, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's
absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, it's not like it doesn't, it's common, it's very rare But I do know of cases where, unfortunately, for whatever reason, and a lot of this has to, comes down to genetics and epigenetics and so on and so forth. But I do know of dogs who are intolerant, extremely sensitive to all meat proteins,
Yeah.
right? Where they lose, pretty much like what you were saying, they're losing weight, they don't have energy to sort of move around. For those dogs, are you saying that they can't live a quality life because they're not eating meat? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that's
I
not
see what
true,
you're
right?
saying.
So I think the balance is really important. And I think it's important to understand that dogs benefit when there is, most dogs benefit when they have variety in their diet. There is a lot that nature has to offer that is extremely effective and helpful for our dogs, that act as very natural ways to heal and repair the body. And not all of that is anchored in animal protein. So it is
Yeah.
definitely a balance for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's a controversial take. I mean,
Okay.
because it's you're talking about balance, so that could be like
Yeah,
a whole diet food, like
absolutely. Absolutely.
so. I don't think that's well, in my opinion, I don't think that's a
Yeah,
controversial
and
take.
I think it's important, right? Because again, when we look at free living dogs, and there are multiple studies on this, What is a Dog is another book written by the Coppingers. They talk about the canine diet and how that's evolved, right? And when we look at the canine diet, and I'm not talking about the wolf diet, I'm talking about the canine diet.
Yeah.
The canine diet largely consisted of, scraps of vegetable scraps, food that humans threw away, of a lot of local grains, right? So in African countries, I think a lot of it was a certain kind of sorghum. In other parts of the world, again, Asian countries, it was a lot of rice because that's what Asian countries largely eat. And there was a lot of presence of fecal matter,
Mm,
right? And they were consuming fecal matter, and that's the popular diet for dogs, or free living dogs, right? And so I think to say that our dogs can only thrive when they're presented this really fanciful, decorative bowl of exotic meats and lots of exotic things is just a little unfair. And I think it makes nutrition, it makes this idea that I can feed my dogs a good food very inaccessible to a lot of people, which I don't think is the point, really. Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree. I think a lot of people just go towards someone that has a little bit more knowledge. They feel
Yeah.
confident with it, but they don't do their research properly, so they just believe whatever they see at first.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So yeah, I do agree with your point of view.
Yeah.
So would you say when someone is making a diet for their dog, should they go to someone to them to help them, or they just do the research by themselves?
So I think that I do think that there is merit in going to someone professional, because again, look, there's a ton of information out there, right? On Google. I mean, I can just Google up how to make a diet chart for my dog, and I'll get a bunch of information.
Yeah,
But I think it's important to remember that a lot of that information is very generic, right? It does not cater to your dog very specifically. And I think that's the advantage of doing a consultation, or that's the advantage of working with a professional, because you get personalized support. It's not generic, it is contextual to your dog. And I think there's a lot of benefit in that for sure, right?
I see.
So yeah, I would definitely say, I think it's always helpful to, I have clients who are extremely well educated and well read about nutrition, and they will ask me a ton of questions. They'll ask me why I'm doing this, why I'm doing that, why am I not doing that. And I think that's a great place to be in, because it's great to have those conversations.
Of
It's
course, yeah.
great to build off of that knowledge that one has. But I think that professional expertise also comes in because, for me, for example, the professional expertise comes in because I also work with a diverse range of dogs, right? And there is so much learning that's coming from there as well that I can offer to even you in your personalized context. And so I think that's the benefit of working with a professional.
For sure. I like that, yeah. So now, changing topics to
Mm.
behavior.
Yes.
I was looking to through some of your content,
Yep.
and there's one about dog aggression.
Yes.
How would you handle a dog aggression case?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think that before I would label, oh, so it's such a complex question. So I'm going to try and answer it as simply as possible. I think in general, I think we have a tendency to view aggression as a really negative thing. It's like something bad, or it's something like deeply problematic that
Yeah,
we need to fix. I think what we fail to do is ask, but why is the dog engaging in these behaviors, right? And when we start covering the why, we can find a ton of answers and a ton of reasons why that's happening. And so my approach really is to look for that why and to say if your dog is expressing defensive behaviors, if your dog is engaging in what we are calling as aggressive behaviors, can we get a sense of why he's doing that? And can we get a sense of what's happening in his lifestyle and in his environment that's causing him to be this way, that's causing him to be on this edge so much, that's leading to these escalated signals. And the example that I always give is of my dog Mutton. When we got her home in the initial few years, she did show a lot of defensive behaviors. She would get into repeated fights with Luchi, my other dog,
yeah,
and we weren't able to figure out why that was happening. And I think that it was very easy and very convenient. It could have been very convenient for us to write it off as, oh my God, she's a pit bull. So, of course, she's going to be aggressive, right?
yeah,
But I don't come from that school of thought, and it doesn't matter to me what the breed is, right? What I'm seeing is the dog in front of me and the behavior that the dog is engaging in. And the more I spent time trying to unpack that why, when I did that exercise for her as well, I found that there were a lot of things that were just adding to her stress, that were making her stressed out. Something
yeah,
as simple as, not wanting to engage with Luchi, but Luchi pushing her way through to want to play with her, right? Or, for example, her, just our body language just being really poor or impolite around her, right?
yeah.
She wanting space from us, but us wanting to like go and cuddle in and hug her really tightly,
And she
her
didn't want it.
just not wanting it, right? The other one that was big, and I see this a lot with dogs who are reactive, who are who do engage in defensive behaviors, was just underlying discomfort and pain. She was in pain, and we weren't able to pick up on that, and we had to address that.
Yeah,
Because quite naturally, like when you are in pain, you are in a shitty mood. You don't want to engage with people, you don't want to talk to people. If people get on your nerves, you're likely to want to yell at them or even hit them, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so once we started addressing the whys of that behavior, she was no longer defensive at all. There was no need to escalate her behaviors and her communication because we were addressing those whys. And so I think that's the way that I would look at a dog aggression case.
so it sounded more like she was just adapting to your lifestyle.
I think adapting, yes, part of it was adapting. And I think it's important again to remember that transitions, right, are
Are
hard.
tough, yeah.
They're so tough, right? And they take a toll emotionally. Sometimes they take a toll physically. But I think this is also the journey of us getting to know each other, right?
Yeah,
Of figuring out, for all practical purposes, I was probably leaning in physically. I was leaning in because I wanted to express affection, but
yeah,
that may not have been her experience of people leaning in. That may not be something that she appreciates. That may not be something that she's able to distinguish, to say, okay, I know this person, I know the intent of this person, I know this person doesn't mean harm to me. She's just saying that this is one big person just looming over my head, and what the
yeah.
hell is happening, right? And so I think, yes, there are paths to adapt, but I also think that adaptation is not a fixed event, right? We're constantly adapting in our relationships,
Yeah,
right? And so, and we see that, right? For example, even in my relationship with my husband, if he moves jobs, or if he has a bad day, or if there is a really stressful event, I am constantly adapting my responses to his mood, into his environment, into his responses as well. And
Yeah,
so I think this notion that, oh, we're just adapting and now this adaptation is done and now we've got it all sorted and we expect robotic consistency in the relationship just doesn't exist, right? It doesn't
I
exist for
agree.
human
Yeah.
relationships. It definitely doesn't exist in our relationships with our dogs. And so it's really interesting because, sometimes I'll have clients come to me saying they've had a dog for several years. And they'll come to me saying, oh, my dog has suddenly become really aggressive. My dog has suddenly become really defensive. They weren't like this before. Uh, and I'm always very amused by that statement because I think we have this notion, right? Once we've seen a certain behavior with a
They
dog,
should always be the same.
yeah, absolutely. It should always be the same, but it isn't, right?
I do.
Behavior
I
is
agree with
constant.
that. When I started training dogs, that's something that I discovered very quickly. That depending on the day, sometimes dogs
Yeah,
don't want it. Like they are just having a bad day,
absolutely.
and it's
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and we try, and I think that's the whole attempt. We try to keep day to day as consistent as possible, but that does not mean that they will give us robotic outcomes, you
Yes.
know? So I think that makes a difference for sure. Yeah.
So if you get a puppy right now,
Hmm.
what would be your plan to raise him?
Oh my God. Uh, I think a big part of it, honestly, the first thing I would do, and this is again something that I just recommend to all clients and everywhere that I talk about this, is I would offer the puppy endless, unconditional connection.
Okay.
And I think that is so, so, so important.
What
Um,
does endless
Connection mean?
connection looks like?
Yeah. So I think it means recognizing that this puppy is a puppy,
Okay.
uh, and is separated from their mother, is separated from their litter, and just requires a lot of physical presence, right? Requires, because there is so much safety in that physical presence. I think what I see a lot of people doing is as soon as a puppy comes in, let's start training, right? Let's start toilet training, let's start teaching sit, let's start teaching no, let's start teaching all of those different things, right? We want to get into training because we're so scared of our dogs misbehaving, right? And I think in that process we just forget to meet that need for connection. We just forget to acknowledge that this is a really, really tiny being. And the equivalent is always like, imagine like a newborn baby comes into your house and then within the
You
first
start
few days,
teaching
yeah,
to
we're
walk.
like,
You first teach.
absolutely,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or within the first few days, you're like, oh my God, just get control over your bowels and like pee and poop in the right place. I mean,
yeah.
it's just not happening, right?
That's an interesting argument because when I started training, and let's say like after that year,
Yeah.
I would always ask myself this question, like if I had a puppy, what would I do? And I
Yeah.
would always go to the place of I would start training him from day one. But
Yeah.
then I realized that it was like, wait. I want to enjoy him. I want to play with him. I want to just,
Absolutely.
and that's,
Absolutely.
it's easy to forget about
Yeah.
just playing with him, interacting with him.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
I think we get so hung up. And I also think that in general, right? Like I've seen this, like we're so scared of having a misbehaved dog,
yeah,
right? It feels like such a big failure or like such a judgment that I think in the process of trying to get like a well-behaved dog, whatever that means, I completely disagree with that definition anyway.
you get a bad behaved dog.
Yeah, and we fail to meet the dog's needs, right? We fail to
Yes,
meet basic needs, and connection is such a basic need. We all want to be connected. We all want to feel belonging to each other. We want to feel like we have our people and our support system. And I think what people don't realize is that when that need is met, when that need is repeatedly met, that's also when we are able to process other forms of communication,
I
right?
agree. Yeah,
And the example is as simple as, and we see this in our own, in human relationships, right? Like there is a reason why, for example, for some people rejection is so heartbreaking,
Yeah.
right? Their partner or someone really special to them saying no or not meeting their request feels so heartbreaking because those connection needs haven't been met, for a while, right? But if we are able to meet those connection needs, then they're able to tolerate that rejection so much more.
I
So
see.
I think that is the equivalent with even dogs. And so for puppies, I think meeting those needs for connection is so 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 important. I think, just building that sense of, can I demonstrate to you that I am going to be there for you physically? Can I demonstrate to you that I am going to be your base for secure attachment? And I think if we focus on that before we start focusing on training and everything else that we need to do, I think a lot of the regulation that our dogs then later struggle with starts forming right there, starts forming then and there, right? So I think that's something that I would definitely do first. And then I think, it's definitely about just understanding where my puppy is also in terms of their developmental phases, right? So again, this is something that I see so often. We've got like a 3-month-old puppy, we've got like a 4-month-old puppy. We're getting frustrated that they're not learning how to, pee and poop in the right place. We're training harder, we're saying no more, da, 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 da. And we don't realize that puppies actually only gain bladder control around 5 or 6 months of age, right?
Yeah.
That's a biological, physiological milestone for them. And so what we're trying to do is teach them to do something that they're not physiologically capable of doing, and then training harder and then getting even more frustrated at that, right? And so
Yeah.
how do we just manage expectations as well? I think becomes important. And I think this is also such a great example to say why I think it's helpful for dog parents to work with a professional, because these are insights and these are perspectives that nobody else will be able to offer you. And I think these are really helpful, and these are really helpful perspectives to hold on to as you sort of continue to build that relationship with your dog. So yeah.
Yeah, I do agree that people, when they get a puppy, they just want the best well-behaved dog
Yeah.
from day one.
Yeah.
So I do agree that when they just start with the training, they forget
Yeah.
to play with them, to connect with him.
Yeah.
And also especially with potty training, people have like a high standard for
Mm,
potty training.
for sure.
And I think people stress themselves more than what they should
For
with
sure.
some of the training.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that. I do agree that sometimes I, because with the dogs that I train, I obviously want them to be well behaved. I want
Yeah.
them to, because that's what I'm offering. So I don't give them so much room of being like naughty or something like that.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that I don't play with them or that I interact with them or I just
Mm.
build a relationship with them. I also agree that the first thing I do with a dog when I train them is build a relationship.
Mm.
And by doing that, it's much easier for me to train
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest one of the biggest issues at a corporate settings, in corporate organizations, because I have that background as well, is the lack of interpersonal relationships, or is the
Yeah.
breakdown in interpersonal relationships, right? And so relationships are fundamental to
Yeah.
anything that we do, and that's true for the relationships that we build with our dogs as well.
Yeah. So you have a pit bull.
Yes.
Yes, and probably you have seen all the news of pit bulls. All
Yes.
right. So what do you have to say about those news?
So again, I think that this is not the first time. I mean, this is really not the first time. I think a certain
Breed.
breed of dogs has been villainized, right? I think pit bulls forever have been villainized, but we've also had Dobermans and German Shepherds,
Rottweilers, yeah.
Rottweilers, right? Mastiffs of different kinds, villainized repeatedly, and I think that it is so complex, and it is such a systemically complex um, issue, right? Because um, there is a question of race, there is a question of economic inequity, there is a question of um, just like media hounding, media creating sensationalist news. I think there is a whole there's just so much politics, this the whole conversation on bully bans and these kind of legislations is very, very, very political, and it's not as simple as it's never as simple as, oh, this dog is a dangerous dog or this breed is a dangerous dog, right? That there's a whole history to that, that comes forward. um, but do these kind of bans work? I don't think so, right? Because again, that seems like a big quick fix. It's not a systemic solution. It's not addressing the root cause, right? um of things. I think again, it's unfair to um label an entire breed of dogs based on instances with a few dogs. I think that's unfair. It's pretty much creating a stereotype, right? It's the same way that, for example, let's say Muslims are likely to get stereotyped because of certain incidents, or other races and nationalities are likely to get stereotyped because of certain instances. And it's very equivalent to that for sure. I think at the same time, and so I think in general that doesn't work. I think it just creates more room for illegal breeding. It creates more room for backyard breeders to come in to meet demands in very unregulated ways, because it's not taking away the demand, right? There is a demand for a certain kind of breed. It's not taking that demand away. It's just feeding it in a very unregulated, unmanaged manner. While at the same time, I think putting an incredible amount of pressure on the shelter systems across the UK, putting an incredible amount of pressure on individual pet parents who work so, 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 so hard to keep their
Train
dogs
them.
safe, to make sure that others around their dogs are safe. Um, and so those kind of bans and legislations just don't work. They don't do anything besides, I think, just like a superficial quick fix to the problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I do agree that I mean banning, I don't think that's the solution.
yeah.
But I do think that pit bulls are much of a bigger responsibility of a dog than other breeds because of the reputation they have.
Yeah,
And
I think again, right? Like I would question that reputation, and I would question who has built that reputation, and is that
yeah,
reputation really true for all of the dogs within the same breed? And they're
yeah,
not, right? Having said that, of course, I think even in India, for example, we've had in the city where I live in, which is the capital of the country, in Delhi, we continue to see a large number of pit bulls who are abandoned. uh, and again, this is a cycle, right? So what's happening is that people are feeding into this perception of who this dog is. This dog is a vicious dog. This dog is aggressive. This dog is, if you want to exude your toxic masculinity, then get a pit bull. It's like an extension of your identity in a lot of ways, right? And so what's happening is people are feeding in to that perception of who this dog is, of what this breed is, and are treating that dog in that manner, right? Where needs are not being met, where safety is not being provided, where there's no regard, there's no consideration, there's no empathy, there's no relationship building per se. And now you have a dog who is living up to that reputation of being vicious, of being aggressive, and you can't handle the dog, and now you're abandoning the dog, and now the dog is ending up in a shelter
yeah,
where folks at the shelter have to work twice as much as hard, three times as much as hard, to get this dog adopted into a house. And the people who adopt the dog have to work multiple more times hard to get the dog back to a place where the dog can feel like a dog and not feel like the breed pressure that
that they have.
has happened. And so it's so complicated, right? It is
Yeah.
very complicated.
Do you think that a dog becomes aggressive of how they're trained or how they're raised?
Both, for sure.
Both.
100%. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I can train using aversive, punitive, coercive methods, and that is going to cause frustration and stress in the dog. I can also raise them in extremely poor environments or in environments where they're isolated. I can raise them And again, right, pit bulls have that history where they have been part and even continue to, in fact, be part of dog fighting circles. So I can raise them in environments like that as well. And that is also going to change and impact their brain structure, how they learn, their physiology, their neurology. It's going to impact all of it. Um, and so I think it is definitely both for sure.
And do you think genetics are important or no?
So, of course, genetics are important because you can't discount that, right?
Yeah,
I would say genetics as well as epigenetics, right? Because again, epigenetics is really how the environment shapes your
shape. Yeah,
genetics as well, right? So it is a combination of both. But again, genetics is so complex. You know, we can't put it down to it's just in the DNA, right? And especially with dogs who are bred with artificial selection, it's just so hard because again, you know, one of the biggest conversations with pit bulls is their prey drive or the predatory drives, right? But again, humans have very conveniently selected for some parts of that predatory sequence and not selected for other parts. And we've interfered so much with this. And again, I think it's important to remember that not all of this interference is ethical, right? Not all of this interference is scientific. And so we have also messed up genetics in a lot of ways for some of these dogs. And so it's not as simple as saying, oh, this is a genetic, this is a inherited trait. Um, because it's just so much more complex than that.
yeah, I do agree. I am like my favorite breeds are like the working class Rottweilers, Dobermans, Pit Bulls, and I do agree that they're wonderful dogs, but I think that not all people can have them. Not all people can own a Pit Bull, a Rottweiler, or a Doberman, because I do think even though they can be very loyal, very protective,
Yeah.
they can come with a lot of package that some might not be able to handle with not
Yeah.
able to handle. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to know your point of view, because even though they're very handsome breeds, I
Yeah.
don't think people just should get a dog just because of how they look.
No, absolutely not. I think that's the worst way to bring home a dog, right? And
Yeah,
I mean, to be very honest, I am not very big on the breed argument at all. Like, I will rarely ever make it. For me, I think when you bring home a dog, and especially if you bring home an adult dog, right?
yeah,
Um, I think it becomes so important to see if the dog's personality matches with yours, right?
I agree. Yes, I agree with that. That's I think the most
Because
important thing.
yeah, because for example, I could have any other breed of a dog, right? I could have a golden retriever. But if the golden retriever is an anxious, fearful dog, I might still have a really hard time with them.
Yeah,
So it's not coming down to breed at all. It's actually coming down to the dog's personality and their
personality.
temperament.
Yeah,
And that's not what we look for when we're necessarily bringing home dogs. And but I think that is what we should look for sure.
yeah. I think people, how I said, people just look for the looks, for the
Yeah,
size, for the
yeah,
saying that oh they're fearless, they're protective, something like that,
yeah,
or
yeah,
just because they're very popular. An example would be like a French bulldog. A lot of people are getting French bulldogs because of how they look, of their
yeah,
coat
yeah,
and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't know if I like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
All right. So we're getting to the end, and my last question for you is, what would be a message that you would give to your audience, to everyone listening to you? Something that you always want to be like, when you get a dog, remember this.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always going to be when you get your dog, just spend time enjoying who your dog is. I think that's so important. I think we've got a dog, and this is the dog we need to make them into. And I think when we go down that path, we forget what makes the dog special naturally. And so I think, take time to enjoy your dog, take time to get to know your dog first before you start saying, I'm going to change everything and I'm going to change things up. Because I think once you start getting to know your dog and once you start getting to enjoy your dog, I think you will automatically realize that there is actually not much or barely anything that you need to change about your dog, right? That you can actually accept them and love them for who they are. And for me, the human equivalent, like I always love talking about human equivalence because it's such a great way to sort of communicate the message.
Yeah.
And to me, it's always like if I were to get into a relationship with someone and the person would start telling me 10, 15 ways that I need to change myself so that they can be with me, like I mean, I would be like, this is a toxic relationship. This is a
Yeah, yeah.
dysfunctional relationship. This is not working, right? Because again, at the end of the day, I want to be in a relationship with someone who can accept me for who I am and who can love me for who I am. And I think that when we flip that for our dogs, it's helpful to think about, are we being in a position where we're exuding that toxicity and that dysfunctionality? Can we just pause and see them and love them for who they are? Um, and then work from there. So I think that's the message that I would leave for sure.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, it's Surabhi, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for your time. I had a great time. I
Yes,
learned a
thank you
lot,
so much. I'm so glad.
and yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gabriel.